the first thing my father ever did on this earth was cry on the shoulder of a highway. Route 30, west of North Platte, Nebraska. July 4th, 1949. My grandmother was 8 months along and stubborn, and my grandfather had a Harley with a sidecar and a stubborn streak of his own, and the two of them were riding from Ohio to her sister's place in Colorado when the contraction started somewhere outside Grand Island. They thought they had time. They didn't. By mile marker 121, my grandmother was screaming into the wind, and my grandfather pulled the bike onto the gravel shoulder, and a trucker hauling cattle hit his brakes behind them, and a nurse named Eileen in a powder blue Buick coming the other way slowed down, made a U-turn, and pulled up beside them like she had been sent. Three strangers on a strip of asphalt. One blanket. One pocket knife sterilized in a coffee thermos. And my father, slick and red and screaming, born between a sidecar and a wheat field at 4:17 in the afternoon. They named him Henry. The world named him Highway. Now I'm standing in an Iowa cemetery 70 years later, and there are 4,000 motorcycles coming down the road to bury him. Why? Stay with me. My name is Daniel McRae. I'm 49 years old. I'm wearing my father's leather vest over a black suit that doesn't fit me right because I bought it yesterday, and I'm standing at the edge of a small cemetery outside a town called Bellevue, Iowa, which I never heard of before my father retired here 8 years ago. There are folding chairs in 3 crooked rows. There is a tent with no walls. There is a hole in the ground and a polished pine box beside it, and on top of that box sits my father's helmet, the matte black one with the dent above the left ear that he never replaced because, he said, the dent had paid for itself. The wind is coming across the corn flat and steady, and it smells like rain that hasn't decided yet. I got here at 8 in the morning. The funeral director said the procession would start at 10. He said to expect a crowd. He didn't say 4,000. Nobody could have said 4,000. The first wave of bikes is rolling in now, and I can hear them before I can see them, that low rolling thunder that doesn't come from the sky. And I'm standing here with a folded vest in my arms wondering how a man who never asked anybody for anything ended up with this many people leaving their lives to come stand on his behalf. So let me tell you about the sidecar. My grandfather kept it. He said he kept it because he wanted his son to remember he came into this world on the road and not in a room, and the road was something you respected. He bolted a little wooden seat into it and put a leather strap on the seat, and from the time my dad was 6 months old until he was 4, he rode in that sidecar everywhere they went. And they went everywhere. My grandfather was a mechanic and a wanderer, and my grandmother never met a horizon she didn't want to chase. They worked the harvest in Kansas, the orange groves in Florida, oil rigs in Texas, apple orchards in Washington. They never owned a house. They owned a tent, a tarp, 2 bedrolls, a coffee pot, a cast iron skillet, and a baby in a sidecar. My father learned to read on the back of that bike. My grandmother taught him with road signs. She'd sit him up between her and my grandfather and point at every sign and make him sound it out. Yield. Detour. Bridge may be icy. He told me once the first word he ever read by himself was Coca-Cola, because the letters were everywhere, painted on every barn from Ohio to Oregon. He learned to fix engines before he learned long division. By 8 he could change a spark plug. By 10 he could rebuild a carburetor. My grandfather had a rule: you can ride anything you can fix. So my dad fixed everything. He fixed a man's outboard motor in Louisiana once when he was 13, and the man gave him $1 and a piece of pecan pie. My father said it was the first dollar he ever earned, and he kept it in a Bible until the day he died. I have that Bible now. The dollar is still in it. His mother got sick the summer he was 13. They were in Michigan picking cherries. She kept coughing. She kept saying it was nothing. By the time they got her to a county doctor in Traverse City, it was already too late. Lung cancer. She lasted 7 months. My grandfather took the bike in the sidecar and his boy and rode south to a man he called Pop Wallace, a club brother from Oklahoma. He said, "Pop, I can't be a father and a widower and a wanderer at the same time. I need to put the boy somewhere that has walls." Pop Wallace had walls. He had a ranch house outside Bartlesville with a wraparound porch and a wife named June, and they took my father in like he had always been theirs. My grandfather rode out the next morning. He came back 4 months later. He left again. He came back. My father said he didn't blame him. He said his father didn't know how to grieve sitting still, so he grieved at 60 miles an hour, and it was the only honest thing he could do. Pop Wallace gave my father his first bike when he turned 16. A 1952 Harley Panhead somebody had wrecked into a fence post. Pop had hauled it home in pieces, and he and my father rebuilt it over the course of a year. Every night after school. The day they kicked it over and it ran, Pop took off his cut and put it around my dad's shoulders and he said, "You ain't a member yet, but you ain't a kid anymore neither." 2 years later, on his 18th birthday, they patched him in. He kept that first patch in a cigar box on his dresser for the next 52 years. It's in my pocket right now. I keep touching it like a coin. The bikes are coming in heavier now. The line stretches back past the cornfield, past the county road, past where I can see. The cemetery only holds about 300 standing, so most are pulling off into the field, and a man in a yellow vest waves them in with an orange wand like he's directing planes. There are plates from every state. Texas, Maine, Oregon, Florida. There is one from Alaska, and the rider has a road-burned face and white hair past his shoulders, and he rode here from Alaska. I don't know him. He is here for my father. Stay with me. I'm going to tell you why. In 1968, my father enlisted in the Army. He was 19. The war was on. He didn't have to go. Pop and June begged him not to, but he said his father had served in Korea, and he wasn't going to be the McRae who didn't. They sent him to Fort Rucker, and when they saw he had a knack for engines, they made him a helicopter mechanic. Hueys. He spent 2 tours in Vietnam fixing Hueys. He never flew a mission. He never fired a rifle in anger. He fixed birds that came back chewed to pieces and sent them back out, and he wrote letters every Sunday to Pop and June, and he didn't drink until his last 6 months in country, and then he drank too much, and he came home in 1971 30 pounds lighter and 3 shades quieter, and he didn't speak about any of it for the rest of his life. He came home to find his father dying. My grandfather had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer while my dad was overseas, and he had told Pop not to write the boy about it. So my father came back, and within 2 weeks he was sitting at his father's bedside in a Tulsa hospital, holding the hand of a man he hadn't really known since he was 13. They had 4 months together. My father said they didn't talk about the road. They talked about engines. They talked about a 1939 Indian chief my grandfather had once traded for a horse and regretted his whole life. My grandfather died in March 1973. My father took the Harley and the sidecar, and he rode east. He didn't stop for a decade. I asked him once where he went in those years, and he laughed and said, "Everywhere and nowhere, and most of it I don't remember on purpose." He picked up work where he could. He slept in barns and in fields, and in the homes of strangers who turned out not to be strangers. He drank too much for the first 5 of those years, and then drank himself sick one night in a place called Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, in the winter of 1978, and a woman who owned a diner there found him face down behind her dumpster at 6 in the morning, and she put him in her car and drove him to her brother, who was a doctor, and her brother kept him alive. My father went to AA the next week. He never drank again. 46 years. Not one drop. He worked in that town the next 2 years. Mechanic at a snowmobile shop. He ate at the diner 3 times a day because the woman who saved his life owned it, and she had a daughter who waited tables there, and the daughter's name was Leela. He was 31. She was 29. He noticed her the first day. He didn't speak to her for 6 months. He told me much later that he didn't think he deserved to. Then one Tuesday in September of 1980, she sat down across from him in a booth and she said, "Henry, I've been waiting on you for 2 years. Are you going to talk to me, or am I going to have to find a louder mechanic?" He laughed for the first time since the war. He proposed 7 weeks later. She said yes. They got married in the diner. Pop and June drove up from Oklahoma. There were 40 people there, and a wedding cake the cook made out of pancakes because Leela said cake was dumb. My father said it was the best day of his life until the day I was born. He stopped riding alone after the wedding. He kept the bike. He rode it on weekends with Leela on the back, but he didn't go off for weeks at a time anymore. He thought his road days were done. He took a job at a tractor dealership in a town called New Glarus. They bought a small house with a yard and a kitchen and a porch that needed work. He built her a porch swing the first summer. 2x4s and chains and a coat of green paint. They sat on that swing every night that wasn't raining for 28 years. They tried to have children for 9 of those years. Nothing took. They lost 2 pregnancies early. They talked about adopting. My father said he could not stop thinking about his own father putting him in a sidecar at 6 months old, and how much he wanted to give a child a yard and a kitchen and a porch. They were 40 years old. They had given up on it. He told me that the last summer before I came, he sat on that swing with Leela and they decided to be content. To stop wanting what they didn't have. He said it was the most peace he had ever felt in his life. And that, of course, is when she got pregnant with me. Now here's the thing. Of course it was. I was born in March 1990. My father was 40. He told me much later that when the nurse handed me to him in the hospital waiting room, they did things differently back then. They made the husbands wait. When she handed me to him, his hands were shaking so hard he was afraid he was going to drop me. He said he stared down at this red, wrinkled thing in his arms, and the only thought in his head was, "I will not put you in a sidecar. I will be in the room. I will be in the kitchen. I will be at the games. I will be at the dinners. I will be there. I will be there. I will be there." That was the vow. He kept it. He never broke it. Not once in 35 years. If you've ever had a father who didn't say much but showed up everywhere, hit subscribe before we go on. I'm telling this for him, and the more people hear it, the more of him keeps going. Now, where was I? He raised me quiet. That's the only word for it. He didn't lecture. He didn't preach. He didn't raise his voice. I am 49 years old, and I cannot tell you a single time that man shouted at me in anger. He taught me by doing. He'd hand me a wrench and say, "Hold this." He'd hand me a fishing pole and say, "Watch the line." He showed me how to change my oil at 12. He showed me how to balance a checkbook at 14. He showed me how to apologize to a girl at 16. He just made me do it, sitting beside me at the kitchen table while I wrote the letter, and then he drove me to her house and waited in the truck while I knocked on the door. That was him. Stand beside. Wait in the truck. Hand on the shoulder. We went fishing every Saturday I lived under his roof. Every single one. We'd leave at 5 in the morning, sit there in his aluminum boat with a thermos of coffee and a tackle box that smelled like 10,000 years of fish, and we wouldn't say a word for hours. As a kid, I loved it. As a teenager, I hated it. I thought he was boring. I was 15 and angry at him for being quiet, and I told him so one Saturday in the boat. "Dad, why don't you ever talk?" He looked at me a long time over his coffee and he said, "Son, I'm right here." I figured that was the loudest thing I could do. I didn't understand. I rolled my eyes. I asked to be taken home early. He took me home early. He didn't say a word about it. I left for college at 18 on a scholarship to a school in Indiana, and I told myself I was going to be everything he wasn't. I was going to be loud. I was going to talk 100 miles an hour and wear suits and never own a wrench. I didn't come home for 2 years. Not Thanksgiving. Not Christmas. I called my mother every Sunday and she never once made me feel guilty, but I could hear in her voice that he was sitting in the next room listening, and I never asked to talk to him, and he never picked up the phone. I was 20 when I finally came home for Christmas. I drove in late on the 23rd in a snowstorm. The porch light was on. The swing was creaking in the wind. My mother hugged me at the door and cried, and my father was standing behind her in the kitchen with a spatula in his hand, and he just looked at me and said, "You want pancakes." That was it. No speech. "No, we missed you. Just, you want pancakes." I said yes. He made me pancakes. We ate them at the kitchen table. He asked me about my classes. He listened. The next morning he said, "Lake." I said yes. We went. We didn't talk. I understood, finally, what he had been telling me when I was 15. I'm right here. That's the loudest thing I can do. My mother died in March of 2010. Heart attack. She was 56. She was at the grocery store. She bent down to pick up a can of soup, and she went. The man behind her in line did CPR until the ambulance came, but it was already over. My father was at the dealership. They called him on the shop phone. He drove to the hospital. He sat with her for an hour after she was gone. He drove home. He sat on the porch swing in his coat until 2 in the morning, by himself, in the cold. I flew in from Chicago at 6 the next morning. He was still on the swing. He looked up at me and his eyes were red and he said, "Danny, I can't be in this house." That was all he said. We sold it the next month. He bought a small house outside Bellevue, Iowa, because he had a friend from the Army who had retired there, and he said he needed to be where there were fewer ghosts. He took the porch swing with him. He bolted it to the new porch. He sat on it every night for the next 16 years. And he started to ride again. Not the way he had before. Not for months at a time. Not running. He rode to funerals. That's what he did. Every time a brother from his old chapter died, or a brother from any chapter that had ever broken bread with his, he got on the Harley and he rode there. 3 states away. 3,000 miles away. Didn't matter. He went. He showed up. He stood at the back of the church or at the edge of the cemetery, and he didn't always speak, and he didn't always know the family well, but he was there. He went to weddings the same way. He went to christenings. He went to retirement parties for men he had ridden with once in 1976. He went to the hospital when somebody was sick. He went to the house when somebody was in trouble. For 16 years. He did it for 16 years. I didn't understand it at the time. I'd call him on a Sunday and ask what he was doing, and he'd say, "Heading to Montana, brother from Billings passed." And I'd say, "Dad, you only met him twice." And he'd say, "Twice is enough." And I'd let it go. I'd think he was just running from the empty house. I thought it was grief in a leather jacket. I see now I was wrong. I see now exactly what he was doing. He died on a Tuesday in April. He was 70 years old. He went the way she did, more or less heart attack fast. He was in his garage. He was changing the oil on the Harley. The neighbor found him at noon when he came over to borrow a socket wrench. The funeral home called me. I flew in from Chicago that night. I went to the house. I sat on the porch swing alone for 2 hours. Then I went inside, and on his kitchen table next to the cold coffee cup, there was a black composition notebook. The kind kids use for school. I had never seen it before. The cover was worn soft. I opened it. And here is where the story turns. Stay with me. It was a logbook. In his handwriting, slow, square, the same handwriting that had been on every birthday card I ever got from him, he had written on the first page, "Funerals since Leela 4/12/2010," and then a list. Date, name, town, and beside each name, one sentence. Just one. The first entry was April 20th, 2010. 8 days after my mother. Jim Pelletier, Davenport, laughed like a horse and meant every word he ever said. The second entry was May 2nd, 2010. Tom Briggs, Cedar Falls, bought me my first cup of coffee in the Army in 1968 and never let me pay him back. I sat down at the table. I started to read. I didn't get up. There were 187 names. 187 funerals in 16 years. Beside each name, one line. Something the man had been. The day they met. A story about a bike, or a fight, or a wife, or a kid. Eddie Vanstone, Sioux Falls, once gave me his last pair of dry socks in a thunderstorm outside Rapid City in 1975. Walt Reasoner, Topeka, taught me how to time a magneto and never made me feel stupid for not knowing. Carl DiMarco, Erie, told me at Leela's funeral, "You don't have to be okay, you just have to keep showing up," and I owe him every mile since. That last line stopped me. I read it 3 times. You don't have to be okay. You just have to keep showing up. That was the whole answer. He hadn't been running. He'd been carrying. Every man on that list he had carried. And every man on that list had a wife, and a son, and a daughter, and a brother, and a chapter. And all those people had watched him stand in the rain at a graveside for a man he barely knew, and they had remembered. The word had gone out across the country, slow and quiet, the way word goes out among men who don't post things online. Henry McRae shows up. Henry McRae always shows up. So when Henry McRae went down, every one of them came. 4,000 bikes. From a country he had quietly held together with nothing but his own attendance. I read the whole notebook in one sitting. It was past 4 in the morning when I closed it. I sat at his kitchen table in the dark, and I cried for the first time since the phone call. Then I went out to the garage. I put my hand on the gas tank of the Harley. The same panhead Pop Wallace had rebuilt with him in 1965. The same one he had ridden out of Oklahoma at 18. The same one he had ridden home from Vietnam. The same one he had ridden to my mother for the first time. The same one he had ridden to every one of those 187 funerals. The tank was cold. I stood there with my hand on it for a long time. I said out loud to nobody, "Okay, Dad. Okay. I see you." That was 3 days ago. The procession is here now. The last of them is pulling in. The man in the yellow vest has stopped waving because there's nowhere left for them to park. They have lined up 2 and 3 deep along the county road in both directions for a mile in either direction. The pastor, a small man in a black coat, stands up at the front. He says a few words. He reads from Psalm 23. He invites anyone to speak. 41 men speak. Some are old. Some are young. Some are women. They each tell one story. They each say one sentence. Almost every sentence starts the same way. Henry was there when. He was there when my husband died. He was there when my brother was buried. He was there when my son got out of prison, and nobody else came to meet him at the gate. He was there when my chapter folded, and I didn't know where to put my patch. He was there when my wife had cancer, and I couldn't ride to my own father's funeral, and he went in my place and called me from the cemetery, and held the phone up so I could hear the prayer. He was there. He was there. He was there. A woman maybe 70 comes up at the end. She's small. She's wearing a denim jacket with a faded patch on the back. She holds up a photograph of a man in a flannel shirt. This is my Robert. He died in 2014. Henry rode 1,100 miles from Wisconsin to bury him. I had never met Henry before that day. He stayed 3 days after the funeral. He fixed my furnace. He fixed my truck. He fixed my back screen door. He didn't ask. He just did. Then he got on his bike and left. I never saw him again until today. I drove 16 hours to bring this picture so it could be in the ground with him. She walks up to the casket. She lays the photograph on top of the helmet. She puts her hand on the pine for a long moment. Then she walks back to her seat and she doesn't cry. She's already cried. She came here to put a face in the ground. I am holding the vest. I walk up. I unfold it. The patches are old and soft. The Oklahoma Rocker from 1967. The Road Captain Bar from 1989. The little black square from his AA chapter, hand-stitched onto the inside lining where you couldn't see it unless you were looking. I lay the vest across the top of the casket. The wind comes across the corn and lifts the hem once, like the vest itself is taking a breath. The pastor nods. The men start to lower him in. The bikes around us, every one of them kick over their engines all at once, 4,000 strong, and the sound is not a roar. It's a long, low hum that goes through the ground and up into the bones of your feet. They idle for a full minute. Then one by one, in a slow ripple they cut. Silence. The kind 4,000 men make on purpose. Then I do the thing I planned 3 nights ago at his kitchen table. I walk over to his Harley, which a man named Bear from the Davenport chapter has ridden in for me and parked next to the tent. I throw a leg over it. I kick it. It catches first try the way it always does. I pull out onto the county road and head west. I don't look behind me. I don't have to. I can hear them. 4,000 engines, one after another falling in. The line behind me, by the time we hit the state highway, stretches back to the horizon and past it. We ride across the Mississippi at Sabula. We ride across Iowa as the sun comes down ahead of us, gold and slow and old. We ride into Nebraska. We hit Route 30 at Fremont. We turn west on it. The same road he was born on. The same shoulder. It's full dark by the time we get there. Mile marker 121, west of North Platte. There is nothing there now. There was nothing there then. Just a strip of asphalt and a wheat field, and a sky big enough to hold every star a man could count. I pull off onto the shoulder. The bike behind me pulls off. The bike behind that pulls off. One by one, for the next 40 minutes, 4,000 motorcycles pull onto the shoulder of Route 30, headlights on, engines running low and steady. The light from them stretches west and east as far as I can see. The wheat field on the south side of the road is lit up like a stage. I get off the bike. I walk to the spot, as close as I can figure it from a photograph my grandmother once kept. I take the folded blanket from my saddlebag. It is the same blanket. My grandmother kept it. My father kept it. I kept it. I lay it on the gravel shoulder. I kneel down and I put my hand on it. I say out loud, into a wind that is the same wind that was blowing on July 4th, 1949, "You made it home, Dad. You made it home." The bike's idle. Nobody speaks. The sky over Nebraska is enormous and black and full of more stars than a city kid like me ever remembers seeing. Somewhere out there is the place where his mother screamed and his father caught him, and a nurse named Eileen in a powder blue Buick made a U-turn because something told her to. Somewhere out there is the start of him. And here on this same shoulder, 70 years later, is the end. Except it isn't. Because behind me are 4,000 people who will go home tomorrow and the next day and the next, and every one of them will show up somewhere. At a funeral, at a hospital, at a kitchen table at 4 in the morning. They will show up because he showed them how. He didn't teach them with a sermon. He taught them with his attendance. 187 funerals. 46 years sober. 35 years a father. 28 years a husband. 70 years on a road he never really got off of. I stand up. I fold the blanket back into the saddlebag. I get on the bike. I turn around. I face east. The 4,000 turn with me. We ride back toward the sunrise that is hours from coming. Somewhere behind me, a single horn taps 3 times the old long-haul trucker's farewell, and 100 horns answer it, and then 1,000, and then all of them, 3 short taps each, rolling back along the line eastbound into Iowa, into morning, into whatever comes next. He was born on a road. He died showing every one of us how to stay on it.